My son and I have just finished running a new section of paddock off for the goats. This is like sort of my untamed back acreage. You can see how thick it grows in. It takes quite a bit of effort to punch through a wall of brush like that. I use a clearing saw. It's got a saw blade on it, and works pretty well. If you had a really good blade, you could take down about 3-inch, but for that I just grab a top handle arborist saw. And oh, my neighbor's coming back from deer hunting and his dogs are going bonkers. So up in here, it took a lot of step-ins. I had quite a few sections too much fence, so I doubled it back. That's why you see multiple piles of it there. And when you do that, it does work well, but you can get a lot of draping, and that'll arc on the ground and lose your voltage. Right here, we got a zigzag to tighten it up. To get through this clay, where my little trail is right here, it's very hard. I use a hammer drill. You see where my kid was drilling holes in the dirt? I just use a hammer drill to punch holes in there, because you'll never get a step in or a, you know, one of these rods from your poly fence. You'll never get that in there. Now this is mountain laurel. You do not want your animals eating that. I'm not going to take it out now because there's so much forage that they're not going to touch it, but it will make them sick. You can see my green goat puke video to learn more about that. Once they clear this area out, I'm going to use my little backhoe, and I've got a root ripper, and I'll grub all that stuff out. Now right here is a corner. You see the way that corner is bent in really bad. You know, there's two different planes pulling tension on that rod, and most people will take a step in and they'll brace it this way, but I find that a rope from the top to a broke off step in going that way works much better, and I'll show you what that looks like over here. There's a string that the goats will probably be tripping on until they figure out where it's at. It's just a little string with a loop at the top, and you hook it in there, and down in here is an old broke off step in, so it makes a triangulated corner brace. You see how much more tension by adjusting the position of that step in. You adjust which, you know, where the pull is, so you can get both sides nice and tight. Now when you got to come across a trough, like right where that log is, there's actually a runoff ditch that's about 16 inches deep. You got to do the best you can, and there's not any one thing that's going to work all the time. In this one, I kind of went parallel in it and put a dog leg in there so that I would be fenced down in the low side and not trying to come across it. In this one, where I had to go across it perpendicular, I just packed some wood in there so that nothing goes under it. And when you got a lot of rise and fall, it's going to take a lot of step-ins. This section of ground, this hump, this area right here has a lot of humpiness to it, and you're going to need the step-ins to take up the slack. Without them, you'd have like 3 strands just grounding. You'd have no voltage on your fence because you'd be losing that voltage to it arcing into the ground. So your verticals don't have any wire in them, but your horizontals do. Your bottom cord, that black one, is just nylon. Your wire starts right there. So anything that's touching from here, or if this is sagging down into the ground, it's going to be arcing. You're going to want to have a tester that gives you amperage and voltage. Amperage of loss, you know, it'll tell you like, oh, you got a 12 volt loss, or a 12 amp loss, 10 amp loss, 2 amp loss, and it'll have an arrow saying go this way or go that way, and it'll also tell you how many thousands of volts are hitting on that fence. Definitely I could not do without it. I probably had to use that thing for an hour yesterday to find a spot where my hot wire had grounded into my woven wire fence. And well, let's go the other direction. You'll see where I've been dozing. So when the acorns are falling, you really want to get your animals out there on it. And the reason they need acorns is for saturated fats. Saturated fat is what you grow a baby from. It's where your hormones come from, where your cholesterol comes from to build those hormones. And you don't want to miss out on it because it does not come in a sack. Now up here is where I took the dozer and just root raked out the mid-story and the understory. So there's a pond right there that's not mine. This trail right here is the property line. And I do need to get a little bit more dirt in right into this dip so that I can have a nice flat fence row, but I don't have time for it right now. But this is going to get seeded probably into perennial hay type species. I don't know, maybe orchard grass, timothy, probably some white clover, red clover. I'll put some summertime Red River crabgrass. I'll put in Red River crabgrass. The only thing I don't want in here is fescue, which is that's what will grow in naturally. So I want to blanket this with a green that does not allow fescue to really get a root in here. But we're going to have a lot of nice shade because I still got a pretty full overhead canopy, yet enough light to grow a really good thick grass crop. And with this much shade, the cool season grasses will be extending their range in the calendar year. Because they're not sitting out in the blazing sun, they will be slower to seed off, and it'll just extend grazing of a higher quality of forage. So obviously my stump and brush pile, whatever I cut from a trail that's green, I leave it obviously down for the goats to eat. So I think that's good enough. You get an idea of the before footage, and it'll probably take them about 2 weeks, week and a half to 2 weeks, maybe 2, because they're going to spend a lot more time eating acorns. If there was no acorns, they would strip the green out of here in no time, and you would see just all these stems, and then the green would start about that high and go up. So what they're going to do is clear this brushiness for me, and when they do, I come in with a little saw and I just start selecting. What do I want to remove? So there's a sourwood right here that's arched over. It's of no value to me, but they'll eat it, so that gets cut down. Now right here I have to choose between a maple and a poplar, and the maple's got no good form to it and the poplar does, so the poplar stays, the maple gets laid down, they eat the top off, and once they do, then I can dice it up and push it with the root rake and the dozer, push it up into the burn pile. I don't normally burn. I do like to see the carbon cycle. I prefer to see stumps and brush and logs just pushed out and left to grow over and rot. They feed the soil. Ideally, if you put them on a high ground, which up there's high ground, ideally you leave them up on a high ground so that nutrient washes down, and that will increase the fertility of all that soil by quite a lot. It's pretty impressive. There's no rocket science involved. Taking the plunge on this stuff is the hardest part. Just start as you can afford. These are Premier One fences. If you've got a good chunk of money that you can blow, order yourself 2 or 3 goat fences. If you're going to run goats or sheep, pigs, you'd only need about half as high. If you don't have much money, if you've only got $20, but you want to quote, invest it, then step-ins are only a few dollars. Go get 10 of them this week. Go 3 of them, 5 of them, whatever. You got to start your collection of stuff somewhere. That clearing saw is about $600. You can just start looking on Marketplace for a cheap one. You're gonna have to have a chainsaw, and I wouldn't buy a junky one, but that's up to you. I'd buy a name brand, high quality one. Even though I'm a super cheapskate, it is worth it. That thing's never done anything but start and run. Never given me a single problem. The top handle I got, my backpack blower, those are the only things I bought brand new, and they're the only things that have never given me any problems. So I'm not even a big steel fan. I actually like Huskies. I prefer to work on a Husky, but the steel dealer here is pretty good. Anyway, you got to start somewhere. Here's my closing shot, because the next time I film this area, you're going to see this just cleared right out. That tree will be identifiable. And always run up close to your good acorn trees. That way the acorns are going to fall in and feed your animals. Well, here's that before and after view, but one thing that jumped up on me was season changed really quite quick. So a lot of these leaves that it would have been a couple of weeks of removing out undesirable stuff and folding it down as feed, that stuff has actually just turned to dry leaves. They'll eat it, but what really starts happening is they whine and they start trying to bust out. So while the season is right, a friend of mine down the road has got a ton of white oak trees, and there's acorns everywhere, like ball bearings on the ground. And he said, hey, bring them over. So to get that saturated fat into them, like I've been talking about, I'm gonna take this netting up and put them in the trailer and bring my spare fence charger, plug it in with an extension cord, and I'm gonna set up a little 1 or 2 day roving acorn patrol. Maybe with the goats and the pigs, but for now just the goats we'll start off with, because they're a little easier and they don't tear the ground up. I don't want the pigs digging holes at his place. But the only evergreen that you still see out here really is this mountain laurel, and you always want to watch that mountain laurel for signs of grazing. When they're chewing off that mountain laurel, you're out of food, and it's time to go.